I think another great question I had, and this was actually an email, so I think it's extra poignant that I kind of mentioned it here for anybody who's interested, since it wasn't didn't show up on the comments, right? But one question I got was that is there a connection between what she talks about as cultural dominance or cultural imperialism is often the more kind of common term, and cultural appropriation. And I think that's a real, and that's not that new of a concept. It's been around for a while, but it's become more of a point of discussion in recent years, which I think is a great thing because I think it's something that needs to be discussed and people need to be more aware of. Right. So cultural imperialism or cultural dominance as a form of oppression is a group coming in and saying, we're going to force you to adopt our cultural norms because they're better than yours. So, a real clear example from American history is Europeans coming in and imposing their standards, their values, their ways of life upon the indigenous people of this continent, forcing them into these religious schools, forcing them to dress in a certain way, forcing them to take, Christian names, all those sort of things. Right? We saw the same thing in the British, well, throughout the British, colonialism, right? But in particular, a real vivid example is the British Raj in India, the British rule in India in the 19th century, where again they came in and imposed their standards, their way of living upon the people of India, and said this is the proper way to live. Right. So that's cultural imperialism or cultural dominance, and obviously a very clear form of oppression. I think, as Young writes about it. Cultural appropriation. And the question I got again was are they basically, is cultural appropriation just a kind of cultural imperialism, or how does it kind of fit into this matrix? And like I said, it's a great question. And my response to that question was that in one way they're the same, even though in kind of execution they're completely opposite. Because cultural imperialism, like I just said, is the dominant group coming in and saying, you will live like us. You will behave this way. You will adopt our way of thinking, our way of eating, our way of dress, our way of praying, all those sort of things, because it's better. Right? It's the right way. Cultural appropriation is where the dominant group really comes in and takes pieces of the oppressed group or the smaller group and basically just misuses them for their own entertainment purposes. And again, just to kind of show the contrast, right? When American television, even when I was a kid, but even especially beforehand, like in the 50s, when television was just kind of coming into being, right, with the idea of like cowboy and Indian movies, right, or TV shows, and that misappropriation of the indigenous peoples, the Native Americans' way of life and living and behavior, and mispresenting them, or the idea of little kids dressing up as Indians, right, and putting on a headdress or something like that, right? That's cultural appropriation. That's taking parts of another group's beliefs, values, systems, and misusing them for basically entertainment purposes. So, like I said, in one way, they're the exact opposite, right? Because cultural imperialism is posing, the dominant group imposes their way upon the smaller group, the weaker group or the oppressed group. And cultural appropriation is where the dominant group comes in and says, "Well, this looks like fun. Let's play with this. This looks like fun. Let's play with this." And they adopted it kind of into their views of things. But ultimately, I think they're the same. Or maybe we could say that appropriation is just a kind of imperialism, that one that Young wasn't necessarily thinking about. Because in both, the dominant group is coming in and saying that this culture, your culture of this group that we are kind of dominating, of oppressing, is not really anything serious. Right? it's either something we can just squash and ignore, or it's something we can have a little bit of fun with. But in both ways, they're belittling the culture of the oppressed group, right? And they're using their cultural values to do it. Right? And so in that way, I think they are both. I think they're one and the same ultimately. But I think one way to kind of think about it, just to kind of organize your thoughts a little bit, is maybe that cultural imperialism could be seen as a unique kind of cultural imperialism. And again, I think it's one that Young, that wasn't on her radar. So I think it was a great question to have, and I think it's definitely something to think about going forward as well.